Welcome again, everyone. My name is Brian Balicki, the host of your podcast, The Juice is Worth the Squeeze. Embrace it. It's my life story as a type 1 diabetic for more than 56 years and still counting. Thanks to all of you who've listened to my prior two podcasts recently. Welcome back. I've received some very nice comments and even some inquiries about an upcoming book I mentioned. It's in process, and I'll update you as time passes prior to the book's release. After listening today, I urge all to leave your comments, questions, and evaluations later. I want to be sure the content in this series is relevant, timely, and practical to all my listeners. At the end of today's podcast, you'll hear some instructions about how to do just that. We share these at the end of each podcast, so please stay till the end. If that's not possible, you can complete a short survey at your convenience in your free time by typing the following address in your computer's search engine, fanlist.com/the juice, and leave your feedback. Again, that's fanlist.com/the juice. When you type those words in the search box of your browser, my comments page will pop up. Type in your comments or leave a voice message. Either way, I'd love to hear from you. To all my first-time listeners today, I appreciate you've taken time out to check us out today. I hope you find your time and your curiosity will be well spent. So here's a quick update since our last podcast. I'm glad to say you will now be able to subscribe and follow future podcasts on your favorite platforms. Going forward, that means you'll be able to find me on Apple, YouTube, their multimedia podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music and its podcasts, and iHeart, and a few others. So this is the third episode of Season 1. It has two parts. In today's podcast, I'd like to begin to discuss why my life story about type 1 diabetes for 56 plus years is distinct from many others out there. It's distinctive in many respects. Here's a few reasons why I believe this is true. It's distinctive in how it all began 56 years ago on a night of gangland violence one summer evening in Chicago. It's distinctive managing my type 1. It actually inspired me, shaped, and drove a 45-year professional career in public health. Despite dealing with physical challenges of type 1, I was able to experience many what I call Kodak-like moments in sports, arts, and recreational events precisely because I managed myself reasonably well. Not perfectly, just reasonably. Most importantly, having lived 56 plus years with type 1, I have some proven practical lessons learned and some suggestions about how managing type 1 reasonably well, not perfectly, can yield a remarkably healthy life in your more senior years, even at my age 71. Managing stress, change, frustration, expectations, and your therapies all play into this. All of these aspects are part of my 56-year-plus journey, and more will be dealt with in upcoming podcasts and very in-depth in an upcoming book. So here's my 30-second elevator speech. If I ever were to run into you in an elevator and you ask me how's life treating me, it's pretty simple. Actually, I'd say I'm alive at age 71 and in very good health, knocking on wood. Never been hospitalized for any diabetic-related episodes of any type since my original admission in 1968. I have no pending or measurable complications. I'll comment more about this shortly. And finally, just living a dream. So you might ask, how different or unique is my life story as a type 1 diabetic? Most importantly, I'd hope you would ask me, what have I myself done personally to make it possible? But to answer the first question, here's a little anecdote I like to share. It adds to my earlier elevator speech. It offers a small glimpse into how my physical condition near age 70 compares to a local athletically minded youth baseball coach 10 to 15 years younger than I ran into him recently. If you're able to watch my last video podcast on YouTube, there was a short segment I filmed at a local baseball batting cage. On that day, I was with my grandson, actually, taking some swings for the fun of it at some local batting cages. It was kind of a busy day. There happened to be a local middle school baseball team and their coach who were also there at that time taking some batting practice. Their coach was standing nearby, observing his players. I couldn't exactly tell how old he was, but I guess he was in his middle to late 50s. He was kind of short, stocky, pretty muscled up though, much more so than me, that's for sure. Occasionally he would glance over at my grandson and I. In my mind, I thought he might be sizing up my grandson as a possible recruit for his team. I raised this story because after we finished, we started to collect our things and move on. Before we left, however, the coach walked up to me. He said, "You know, I was watching you take some swings today. You were making some pretty good contact. I wish I could still do that. My back problems," he said, "though, are just too painful. I just can't swing a baseball bat anymore." I inserted the video clip to purposely demonstrate that I, the 69-year-old grandfather, still had pretty good visual acuity and dexterity with hands, arms, and legs that day, good enough at least to put some pretty good licks on baseballs moving at me at 60 miles an hour. As a diabetic, I didn't find myself to be that impressive, but from the coach's point of view, what appeared to be more impressive was the fact that I could easily swing a baseball bat 20 times without breaking in a 2-minute period, simply turning my torso each time. I found it ironic that the local baseball coach was impressed with me that day, a grandfather in my late 60s, about how I could hit a baseball consistently. I never told him I was a type 1 diabetic. He didn't think to ask me, obviously. No, he didn't even comment about how my vision, arms, hands, and everything else I had to coordinate consistently to hit a baseball at 60 miles an hour that day. For me, I knew how I had to depend and how thankful I am to maintain those skills to hit a baseball. I even impressed myself with how well I did that day. Until that moment, I never even bothered to think how important the condition of my back and torso are to hitting a baseball. As a diabetic, honestly, I've never been evaluated nor examined for the condition of my back. For other things like neuropathy, yes. My eyesight, of course. Weight gain, absolutely. But I could turn my torso, but how I could turn my torso, no, never been done. In retrospect, there are a lot of little physical things that go into hitting a baseball, but there are also a lot of little things that need to happen each day to achieve the medical milestones I have as a diabetic for more than 55 years. I talk about them more in greater detail in later episodes and in my upcoming book. Suffice it to say here, looking back, I count my lucky stars every day. I mention all of this as a way to summarize my health at age 71. I now play some golf, go to the driving range for some practice in hitting a stationary little golf ball, and do play some putt-putt from time to time. I also alternate between rowing for 20 to 30 minutes a day and walking 2 miles a day, 5 days a week. I usually take 2 days off a week to recoup, to recharge. After all, I am 71. So here's some data to consider to understand how extraordinary I consider myself to be a type 1 diabetic at age 71. I'll also touch on what the data suggests to me about the role I've played in achieving my medical milestones. These comments are not my ideas. I draw them from recent research, hard data on type 1 diabetes. Without a doubt, diabetes is a deadly disease with lifelong consequences for those unable to manage it and its daily challenges. For the next few minutes, I'll share some data and graphics to show how diabetes can impact lives of diabetics if their condition is not reasonably managed over a lifetime. I can say this because I have only reasonably managed my own type 1 over 56 years, but have not experienced any of these complications. Not perfectly managed, no, just reasonably so. The data looks at the frequency of hospitalizations among diabetics 60 years of age and older, beginning in 2010 through the end of the last decade. It comes from the Joslin Diabetes Research Foundation in Boston. the group whose mission it is to prevent type 1, to help those with type 1 to manage their conditions, as well as to contribute to finding a cure. So beginning in 2010, there were approximately 1.3 to 1.4 million type 1 diabetics in the U.S., and another 25 to 30 million type 2s. In 2010, I was 57 years old, and by 2019, I was part of the 60 to 69 year age group. I found myself right in the middle of the trends I'm going to be discussing now, but I was not part of the statistics here, and am not today, thankfully so. So the opening graphic looks at all of the conditions and outcomes, common outcomes to diabetics. The first graphic is sort of testimony to the severity of and disruption that diabetes can cause. It displays the total number of hospitalizations to diabetics in the U.S. age 60 and older. The box at the center of the graphic shows that 5 to 6 million hospitalizations for all diabetes-related conditions occurred for 2 points in time, 2010 and 2019, but they probably occurred for most, if not all, of the years in between as well. If true, approximately 45 to 50 million hospitalizations have happened over the entire 9-year period amongst the 30-plus million diabetics who were alive at the time. These numbers confirm for me the very high probability of an admission for any one diabetic like me during that period. The orange bubbles in the outer portion of the graphic capture the number and trends in diabetic hospitalizations within 4 subgroups of the overall total. I'll talk about these in just a moment. So let's first talk about kidney disease. First graphic features data on hospitalizations for kidney-related complications. Kidney disease is ranked second in terms of frequency of all hospital admissions to diabetics. During the 9-year period that I talk about here, there were between 1.6 and 1.7 million admissions annually for this condition. This complication of diabetes is not only very serious, but extremely consequential and costly. When accompanied by chronic kidney disease, or worse yet, end-stage renal disease and dialysis, it is truly consequential. I have not dealt with any of these outcomes. Here, in each grouping that follows, there's a graphing displaying a bubble with a red X inside of it. This indicates I have not experienced any hospitalizations for each condition that I talk about as type 1 in my journey of 55 plus years. So moving on to the next group, retinopathy. Hospitalizations for retinopathy are the third most common reason for hospital admissions among U.S. diabetics over 60 years of age. Approximately 800,000 admissions occur annually, and more than 7 million occurred over the past decade. Personally and luckily, within the past 3 years, I've only had an elective cataract surgery. This was not for any advanced stage cataracts. No, rather it grew out of my regular routine trips to my ophthalmologist, and it was only recommended to me that I consider it simply to improve my overall vision, particularly driving at night. I did it, and I don't regret the decision at all. As for retinopathy itself, at a recent visit to my ophthalmologist, I learned that the minor evidence of retinopathy I had displayed within the last 5 years has actually disappeared. Why? Increasingly better control over my blood glucose during that period and routine checkups with my ophthalmologist. No hospitalizations to report here as of today. Third grouping is neuropathy. This is the most frequent visit for hospitalizations among U.S. diabetics. It accounts for more than 2 million hospital admissions every year and an estimated 18 million over the last decade. While I do have some peripheral neuropathy, the video that I showed earlier, getting exercise and taking swings at a local baseball batting cage, confirms my neuropathy is pretty modest. I've been very fortunate to escape the consequences of severe neuropathy in my extremities in my 55 plus years. And finally, the last group, amputations of lower extremities. The least frequent but probably most consequential reason for hospitalization among diabetics is amputation of lower extremities. Here we're talking about toes, feet, and lower legs. These body parts typically are the common targets for severe neuropathy due to poor blood circulation. While the condition tends to be least frequent nationally, myself, I've followed it with particular interest, tracking the frequency of amputations in my own county where I live today. I did this recently as part of some part-time work I used to do helping to raise funds for a local nonprofit whose mission it was to assist seniors with living independently in their homes in their retirement years, helping seniors to stay connected with one another, providing free scheduled transportation services as well as handyman services and socialization services while living at home were the core services of this organization. Turns out that here in my county, hospitalizations for amputations, like I just described, occurred 70 to 90 times per year among seniors 55 years and over in the last 7 years. The organization I work with planned interventions with these diabetics and other seniors to try to avert these complications. So I highlight the above graphics to make a critical point. Every year, these hospitalizations occur annually to diabetics. With each one, they trigger a lifetime of very serious challenges diabetics must face every day. How different have I been to avoid these consequences in my life every year for the past 15 years? In a word, it's very simple, extremely so. So these are the numbers, the end of my Part 1 discussion. In Part 2, I'll be talking about some other important parts of my life story and what part I've played in it. My next episode, the 4th one, I'll talk about the improbable beginnings of my lifelong journey with diabetes. It's almost a Hollywood-like movie drama. It begins with what I call the ambush, a night of gang violence on the streets of Chicago back in 1968. Yes, that night changed my life forever. I hope you'll tune in with me for more on that episode. Finally, as I mentioned earlier, if you have any comments, questions, or other feedback you'd like to share about this podcast, I definitely welcome it. Please visit my podcast survey at fanlist.com/the juice. Let me repeat that, fanlist.com/the juice. Thank you for your time. Signing off for now. Cheerfully, Brian Balicki. Have a great day.